All right, we are live with our first trio. Rita, thank you so much for joining us. Jillian, welcome back. It's so nice to have you here. Welcome,
Thank
welcome.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. So, Rita, I'm so excited. As you know, we do a mad dash in just 20 minutes on these lives. So, I have a ton I want to unpack with you and Jillian today. But for some of the folks who don't know you, you have a pretty neat background. So, you are based out of Egypt. You also speak German. You are the Cairo site leader for Dell Technologies, but also have a background in leading practices. You were a researcher. You have studied and degrees in international business, as well as multiple technical certifications. So for those who don't know you, welcome and tell us a little bit about yourself, how you even got engaged in this conversation.
All right, so let me just start by clarifying one thing. I'm leading the Cairo site on one specific business unit of Dell Technologies. So we're a huge organization. So I don't lead the entire site. We have an awesome leader who does that, and I work very closely with him. Um, but yeah, again, for those who don't know me, my name is Rita Badawi. I live in Cairo, Egypt. And as Sabrina had mentioned, I had studied international business in the School of Management and Technology. So it's always been management and technology hand in hand for me. Yeah, since my day one in my career journey, actually, I've been in IT. I started in like customer support, then I moved up and across multiple organizations. I worked in IT operations and delivery services. So I feel like it's safe to say I've seen it all. And yes, I do speak German. I do speak a couple of other languages too. And today I work for an amazing team, which is part of Dell Technologies. um, I also work with other people. So, like from outside my direct organization, I mentor and I coach people, especially on the matters that interest me, such as the agile mindset, agile working ways, leadership development, diversity and inclusion, and of course, empowering women in tech, and more specifically, women in leadership in tech. And that's how I came across Jillian. So first, I was a big fan of her content on social, and then I found out she's also a member of Dell Technologies, and it's a huge family. It's very open. So I just one day pinged her and I said, "Hey, Jillian, you don't know me, but I'm a big fan, and I also support women in tech and women in leadership, and maybe one day we could be talking about this or collaborating on it." And then here we are.
That's exactly it. So Jillian, tell us about that, because one of the neat things that I love that you do on socials, you're very transparent, and you are always encouraging people to get comfortable, not just with those subtle brags, but being comfortable with being uncomfortable and being human, as you call it. So tell us a little bit about that conversation and sort of where that took you, what led us here.
Yeah, so Rita reached out to me, and I always obviously respond to people, whether you work at Dell, whether you don't, you want to talk about things that I'm interested in. I'm more than happy to have a conversation. So I was really excited. Also, like, I was really honored that someone was like, "Oh, I'm a fan." I'm like, "I have fans." That's so
You do.
exciting. Low key LinkedIn famous. I don't even know if that's a thing, but so Rita reached out to me and we started to have a conversation, and I want to talk about something a little bit uncomfortable for a minute, and that is unconscious bias. So when Rita told me she was based in Egypt, I had a moment where I thought to myself, I didn't even know that women in the Middle East had the opportunity to work freely and have jobs like Rita has. And I know unconscious bias is really uncomfortable for people, and it's really uncomfortable to uncover. But I just said it to her, because what you see with me is what you get. What you get is what you see. I don't know, but I'm very honest. I consider myself a very kind person, but I also don't hide my feelings about things, and I always speak up. And I wanted to have that conversation with her about, what it's like being a woman in the Middle East who has an amazing career and an amazing job at a company that we both love. And by uncovering that unconscious bias, I was able to sort of debunk it and move forward with it and learn. But I think when we don't address these unconscious bias, that's when it becomes a problem. We're all human here. We all have unconscious bias. Having an unconscious bias doesn't make you a bad individual. It doesn't mean you're someone who doesn't like people who are different. It doesn't mean anything like that. It just means you're human and you learned something along the way that you thought was true. And then you made the decision to debunk it and learn that it wasn't true. And that's really the key to moving forward in diversity and inclusion is changing mindsets of people. So Rita, I can't thank you enough for reaching out to me and helping me uncover that and uncomfortably share it on on a live for everyone. But it's really important to me and my growth. So we ended up having a conversation about being a woman in the Middle East who has an amazing career. And I know that your career is different from other people, and this is obviously your personal experience. So I want to share that as well. This is Rita's personal experience, but can you tell me a little bit about your experience as a woman in tech working in the Middle East?
Yeah, I think it all starts with education, really, right? So I did notice growing up and going like to school, to college afterwards, that there's been a lot of girls who wanted to get involved in such things, right? Again, I had studied primarily international business with a minor in technology, but a lot of friends of mine, acquaintances, people who went to school with me, they have studied really technical majors, and so it's accessible to you, provided that quality education is accessible to you from a socioeconomic perspective. Now, that's a different conversation to have, right? But once you have that, it's equally available to men and women. And what I love about my community, at least, is that a lot of us did want to do that, right? So that was my experience from an educational perspective. Now, of course, moving forward, you go into work, right? And as a junior, I was very surprised that the team I started off with and all the teams that were like, seated in the same cubicles right next to us, it was almost a 50-50 ratio. Again, that's very surprising, right? It's not like this, and it's not to be taken for granted because it's not the normal thing that we see. We hope for it to be one day. Um, but then again, it fluctuates. But in my case, in my team, it has been almost 50-50 all the time, right? And that had encouraged me to, when I became a leader myself, to just hire for skill. Demographic is part of who we are. We can't ignore that, but it's not a reason to get hired for me. And so I see it, if you hire for skill. I did end up sometimes with rather controversial teams of like 10 people where you had 8 of the same gender, for example, right? But it was justifiable and it made business sense. And for me, that is part of being also very diverse and inclusive. Sometimes when you just don't have that for the sake of having it, you have it when it's required, when it's right, when it's doing what it's supposed to do. So that would be in a nutshell my experience, especially with the gender demographic, but generally with everything when it came to education and to working in tech.
That's yeah, it's amazing to hear you, like I said, talk about it, because there are probably other people out there watching this that maybe have the same unconscious bias as myself, but the education piece and uncovering it and opening your mind is really the key to this diversity and inclusion. And while Sabrina and I focus on women in tech because we are women in tech and we've had the experience and we can share about it, the goal is really overall diversity and inclusion. And that's so incredibly important, to your point, in building teams and making sure you're building diverse teams with the right skills to do the job, because diversity means so many things. So thank you for sharing that.
Of course.
So, my love, anyone who knows me knows my absolute obsession is education. I have a background in education and behavioral analysis. I harp on it. It's one of my passion projects. Jillian's probably sick of me ever even talking about it. So after our initial conversation, so you and Jillian met after you reached out to her, then all three of us got on the line. And since then, I got to tell you, I've even had my own reflections for multiple reasons. First, I really started to realize the impact or the implications when we take sort of a very focused, laser focused view and we kind of don't step back to look at the whole picture. And that's why I wanted to title this live A Global Perspective, because I think part of the greater lesson here, at least for me, as I was, reflecting from our conversation, is that you have to take this global perspective. And then I started digging into the research and realizing that organizations and teams operate better, more efficiently, see faster time to market, faster time to revenue when they have this sort of mindset and when they really have this sort of global perspective. And so it's not, I'm constantly trying to fight this sort of, I don't know, myth that this is all to just sort of pat yourself on the back or to check a box. There really are business implications. Your business will the research shows your business will run better when you take these types of approaches. And for somebody who's obsessed with enablement and education, the fact that you say it starts with education couldn't have made my heart glow even more. And so I'm so glad that you said that. It takes investing in yourself, right? You went and sought those opportunities out, that education out. To your point, there's a socioeconomic component, which Lord knows I can get on that soapbox for 20 hours. I won't. But there's also, your team investing in you. And to your point earlier is taking that global perspective, taking a macro perspective at the entire situation. And that's how you really drive diversity and diverse thoughts and inclusion. So as we, with that kind of framework or that mindset, I know we don't have a ton of time, but I would love to drill in and get your thoughts of where do you see, yourself or leaders taking a global perspective, and how do you see that impacting both your own actions and maybe the businesses that you've been involved in, the business units that you've been involved in?
Wow, that's a big one. There's a lot to say about this, right? I feel like when you take the global perspective on things, it leaves room to get inspired by other people's experiences, much like what we are trying to do today. So, a conversation, one a very friendly one, just like what we've had, Jillian, right? It might open somebody's eye to, maybe we need more diversity in this or that team. Maybe we could be driving this result from having a fresh pair of eyes that comes from a completely different background, right? And then when you have that global perspective, you also necessarily will have the global access, right? So if you're working on a project and you bring in the people from the different geos, the different countries, locations, cultures, not just the demographics of it, you get a broader view on things, and then you're able to produce much more value, because there's definitely always going to be a blind spot, but you're uncovering most of them because a lot of other people are looking onto the same matter from a different perspective than you are, right? So it definitely helps you move forward. Absolutely.
And in the long term, in from a learning perspective, it's called chunking. When you have information that's already set, your brain is already built out. Jillian knows this. Your neurosynapses, your brain's already got those pathways, that information stored up. And then when you build on it, it makes it easier to be more diverse, be more inclusive, take more global perspectives, be more innovative, be more creative. So it compounds, it builds on itself. The more you do it, the easier it becomes, and it chunks on itself, it builds on itself. So I'm so glad that you said that, because it's so true, and it keeps ringing true. So, you've gone through a lot. To Jillian's point, you have an amazing career and much more ahead. Is there something that you wish you knew as a woman in tech? Jillian and I have written a couple guides so far. We also have a couple tips from the top, which we highlight some of our top, leaders that we really, value their opinion, and they give 3 top tips that they wish they knew. We don't have time for 3 top tips, but if you could give us your top 1, what do you wish you knew as a woman in tech, kind of looking back?
In hindsight, I did notice very early on that a lot of women, while they have a passion for tech and they would work in it, they're not necessarily enthusiastic to become leaders in that field. And by leaders, I also mean managers, not just, thought leadership or being influential. And I wanted to, right? So I did look, and I looked around, and the most role models that I found were male. So I started emulating a lot of the behaviors that I've seen, thinking that, this is the profile for being competent, so that's what you need to do to get on the top. Right now, being more mature, a little more far ahead in my career, I think that was the worst thing I could have done. And it's not because they're bad, it's just because they're not me, and they're not built like me. And I have other skills, other predispositions, actually natural ones, that make me who I am. And in that, they also give me an advantage, and they can make me equally successful. So I would say just bringing my whole self to work, as cliche as it sounds right now, that would have made me a much better leader then, and maybe would have changed my trajectory. I wouldn't know now, but today I'm more mature to point to that, and maybe hopefully someone who's doing the same thing would figure that out and, avoid it.
Yeah.
I love that. That's such a good one. And I had that same experience where I was like, this is what the leaders are doing. This is what I should do. But it wasn't me, right? And now that I'm me, I'm much happier and I'm much more successful. So
Absolutely.
And that's, Jillian, to your point, that's what's brought us all together, is you being you. I think about that. I mean, think about the implications. I know it sounds cliche, but it's cliche because it's really freaking hard and scary. We were just posting about how it takes a tremendous amount of wisdom and courage. And I think people go, oh, you're so bold, you're so brave. No, it takes a lot of wisdom too, to realize that this is actually better for me and for you. The more authentically I show up as myself, it's better for everyone. And this right here is proof that when you show up as yourself, as wise and as scary and as courageous as that can be, the impact is really difficult to calculate because it can have such a ripple effect, So, I mean, just right here, Jillian, to your point, because you're authentic and you put yourself out there, in a subtle brag or not, but you put yourself out there, and it brought us all together. How cool is that?
It's cool. It's been wild. It's very cool.
That's the other thing. Well, before we drop off, Jillian, Rita, thank you. Thank you for joining. Do you have any last words or resources that you would recommend if somebody's looking to be their authentic self, looking to show up as their whole self? Do you have any resources that you would recommend that you really like?
Well, definitely your resources, your guide. It helps. It's so to the point. I wish it existed back then when I was a younger leader. So I definitely recommend that. And I recommend having difficult conversations like Jillian and I had. It's not a resource, but it's very helpful. It's very healthy to do. Also very uncomfortable, to your point, Jillian. But it's if we hadn't had that, and quite honestly, it wasn't the first time I felt like someone felt this way about me, but you were the first one who had the courage to come and say it out loud, and then we could talk about it, and then we came to this forum where we were able to maybe debunk that myth for some, right? So have difficult conversations, don't shy away. I would absolutely recommend that.
Yeah, good.
We didn't pay her to say that first part either, I swear.
All of this has been unpaid. That's right. Jillian, any resources, any guidance?
Man, any resources, any guidance? I would say personal development is so key for me just in general. And that's how I found my true being, right? And who I really was. So there's a lot of really great books. I have a whole stack right here. I've got The Leader's Greatest Return. I have Michael Dell's book here, Play Nice But Win.
Also an unpaid endorsement.
I've got Grit by Angela Duckworth, which is one of my favorites. Because I always say, I'm not the smartest in the room, by far, but I will be the grittiest. I've got a lot. Think Like a Monk, Jay Shetty.
Yeah.
So I've got a whole stack here. I highly recommend, committing to read or listen and really help find yourself. So yeah.
I love it. Well, thanks, you two. You uncovered a lot today, and I'm so appreciative of your boldness, your wisdom, your courageousness. So thank you. And thank you all for joining. We'll see you soon.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.